Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is a roasty, toasty afternoon in August here in suburban Chicago, and the cicadas are out making plenty of noise, just like last episode. I just finished a journey to the library in which I was returning 3 volumes 4, 5, and 6, of the Jeff Lemire comic, Gideon Falls. And I regret that the name of the artist has escaped me at this point, but go ahead and check rattleboxgames.com for the show notes to this episode, in which I will post that information. Well, Gideon Falls was a 6-volume comic set, meaning it was 36 issues. It was a sort of supernatural horror story in a kind of Lovecraftian vein, in which it turns out that at the center of the universe there is good and evil, and the evil is in the nature of a hungry, timeless being, which takes the form of a giant cockroach and many, many small cockroaches. It's called the One Who Smiles because when it infects someone, it gives them this gigantic smile with sort of horrible red eyes and these red teeth, and they kill people. And it's got this time travel element and this multiple dimension element, and characters accidentally moving through time and from dimension to dimension. It's a wild, trippy story that's well told and interesting. I'm not sure it makes a ton of sense. It's really creepy to look at. The art is deliciously gross. Reminds me a bit of Ben Templesmith's style from, he's the artist known for 30 Days of Night. He also did Criminal Macabre. Definitely worth checking out if you like comics. But it got me to thinking about comic books that would make interesting games. What comics would I like to see in game form? Now, there have been a few already. There are a number of comic books themed after the superhero worlds of Marvel and DC. You've got Marvel Legendary, you've got the DC Deck Builder, or the Marvel Versus system. You've got, I suppose, arguably the Aliens games. Those are arguably about the movies, but they could just as easily be about the comics, because there's plenty of content about the Aliens comics as well. Just about a month ago, the comic book Mind Management, MIND-MGMT, came out with a game that sounded like it was interesting. It's a hidden role game. The art was done by the artist from the comic book, which is neat. Now, I have trouble seeing that as a very compelling board game unless you've read the comic. So that really drives home this question of what does it take for a comic book to be compelling and interesting, and what kind of actions would you need to do to translate that well. Oh, one other one I forgot to mention, direct one, is I have the Hellboy board game, which is of course an adaptation of the Hellboy comics. And in that one, they got licensed to use the art from the Dark Horse comics, so it is a direct pull from that world, and the characters are all drawn from that. So that one is a pretty close adaptation. But so it got me thinking about games that do this without direct licenses, and then what are a couple games I would like to see, or what are a couple comic book worlds I would like to see dive into this space. So the first comic I would say that sort of does this without doing it is Victoriana. Victoriana is a game I've mentioned a couple times that I got last year around Christmas time, and it is essentially sort of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen as a board game. So you have a bunch of famous adventure type characters from the Victorian era. You've got Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you've got Sherlock Holmes, you've got Mina Harker, all the greats, the Invisible Man, and these are all characters who are working together to stop the criminals from doing bad stuff in London. And you know, that feels very much like the original Alan Moore comic, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which has this same kind of idea, a group of adventurers drawn from literature. Of course, in Alan Moore's world, all the literature really happened, and so all of the characters become viable. So that one is a good sort of close adaptation without actually being one. The other one I would point to is there's a great comic from the 90s called Mystery Men. I guess it was into the 2000s as well. So there's a comic book artist who made this comic book called The Flaming Carrot about a kind of doofus who read too many comic books and came to think he was a comic book hero. And then he met a scientist who gave him some high technology, an atomic powered pogo stick and a mask that had a flame coming out of the top, and he became the Flaming Carrot. Well, in the world, Bob Burton is the name of the comic book artist, I just remembered. In that world, there is this group of superheroes, all of whom are sort of second run nobodies who want to be famous superheroes, but they just aren't good enough. And they form their own superhero league called the Mystery Men, and generally they die a lot when they're in battle. Now, they did make a filmic adaptation of the Mystery Men, which I actually thought was pretty good, with Ben Stiller and Janeane Garofalo and Hank Azaria, called Mystery Men. This idea, a bunch of sort of low-rent superheroes, wannabe superheroes, is the sort of core of the idea of the game Heroes Wanted. Now, Heroes Wanted, this is a game I haven't played in several years, so I really should get it back out. But Heroes Wanted is about a group of superheroes who are kind of auditioning. Like the big team at the center of the city does not have, they've lost a member, and so they're looking for a new member. And so they're on the lookout for a superhero to distinguish themselves. So the characters in Heroes Wanted are showing up to try to stop villains, and they're doing so with the goal of becoming recognized for their achievements in fighting crime. And so not only are they fighting villains, they also fight each other a little bit to try to gain glory. It's a fun game, really interesting, cool card play mechanisms, just a really neat game that I enjoyed quite a bit. Went out of print after 2 expansions, I believe, but I do have both of the expansions, so I have all the material for that game, and I really enjoyed it. But I haven't played it in a while, so it makes me think we should get it out again. That's Heroes Wanted. So those are adaptations I'm familiar with, and like I said, Heroes Wanted, not a direct port of Mystery Men, but the same sort of founding story. So I was thinking about what are some comic properties I'd be really interested to see as games. Well, the first one is one of my favorites, and this is Transmetropolitan. Transmetropolitan is a very dark, satirical look at the cyberpunk future through the eyes of a gonzo journalist, and it's written by my favorite comic book writer, Warren Ellis. Transmetropolitan has a very dark view of politics, bordering on anarchic, but with a strong socialist bent. And the main character is this sort of firebrand, like I said, gonzo journalist who puts it all on the line to write the stories that everybody needs to know. I guess there's maybe a little bit of Mary Sue there, Warren Ellis seeing himself as a potential Spider Jerusalem is the name of the character. But overall, it's a really compelling comic. That said, I have no idea what the game would be, because you can't be Spider Jerusalem. I don't know how that would work unless it's a game about uncovering corruption and conspiracies, which seems more suited to a role-playing game than a board game. So, I mean, I guess it could be an adventure game set in the world of Transmetropolitan, but that often doesn't go very well either, because people want to be the main character. So the real challenge of this would be finding the niche that makes this world great. Probably it would involve picking one of the key stories and making a game around that. Or I suppose making a campaign game around, or making a game where there's different scenarios and you're trying to resolve the scenarios. But it would have to be that you are Spider and his cadre of fellow journalists, and you're trying to resolve the journalistic puzzle. So maybe it becomes a Sherlock Holmes style mystery game, because so much of it is about interviewing people and finding out what happened. So maybe that's what it is. You are Spider Jerusalem and his fellow people, and you're going around interviewing people. There could be elements where you have a certain sort of like detective, a modern crime story. You could have a certain amount of availability to use different tools and other things that would be ways to persuade recalcitrant witnesses to talk. That might have some benefit. Yes, I'm going to say a Sherlock Holmes style cooperative mystery solving game would be the way to adapt Transmetropolitan. Another game or another comic that I would like to see is to think a little bit about how Gideon Falls would work. Now, the core story of Gideon Falls is this terrible monster trying to consume everything, and so different people have to work together to defeat it. And I would think that each player comes from a different world in the Gideon Falls multiverse. So each player represents one of the different Gideon Fallses that's in the story. And your goal would be to secure your Gideon Falls against the AI, the enemy creature thing, or in losing it, rescue enough people or enough whatever power and escape to one of the other realities as the reality is consumed. Because a big part of the comic is this creature is overwhelming, and it's not clear that some realities are consumed, but it seems like it might be. So this would be maybe a sort of Pandemic style cooperative game or a tower defense style game. It's just that each player has their own board, and I would think there'd be some asynchronicities in the way that those different boards worked. Again, I'm not sure how compelling this would be if you didn't know the world. And this is the downside to any of these IPs. The IP is only as powerful as the way that it conveys the world. So this is maybe a silly set of things, but nonetheless. I was going to say the next one I wanted to see was Alan Moore's Top 10. But Top 10 is another superhero story, and I feel like there's been plenty of those as comics already. So the idea of finding another superhero comic story to be told isn't all that compelling, I don't think. So instead I'm going to say Saga. Saga is the Brian K. Vaughan dramatic story about star-crossed lovers who have escaped to try to stay together and fight the destiny of their two warring civilizations. And then on top of it, there's all these other people interfering as well. I will confess it's been a couple years since I read it, and I don't remember the plot all that well, but it has super compelling characters and character designs. And I would think this would be a dungeon crawl style game where you represent one of the main characters trying to get through the game, and each scenario represents a different one of the kind of challenges that you have to face. So it would have different moments from the story that could be turned into scenarios for you to play. I would think that that's probably going to be the most compelling way. And the art in the game is really compelling, and I'd be keen to see how well it translates to a board game form. One guide to see how well that works or not would be, I don't know how many people played the Umbrella Academy board game that came out, or that was Kickstarted anyway. I haven't heard anything about it coming out, so I don't know if that game was just a Kickstarter and then gone kind of game, or if it was getting into the hands of reviewers and stores, because that seems like it would be a good guide to seeing about what it means to have a comic book get adapted to a story. Now, what are some comics that I think could not be adapted, you ask? I'm sure you're asking. I didn't even mention there's definitely a couple adaptations of the Walking Dead comics. That's another one that has been tackled. One of the other comic book lines that I think would be interesting to see get adapted, but probably never could, would be Preacher, the Garth Ennis comic. Very sacrilegious, sort of blasphemous, scary story, suggesting that God and the angels are petty little tyrants and that they meddle in earthly affairs. The TV show made an interesting twist on it, but I think neither one would make a good board game. It would be hard to understand those as a good board game. Well, those are my thoughts on some comic books that could be adapted into board games. I'd be interested to hear what are some comic book licenses or comic book stories that you would love to see as a board game. You can let me know over on Board Game Geek in our guild, 3269. You can send me a direct message to Wombat929 on Board Game Geek, or by email, brendan@rattleboxgames.com. You could also find me on the asynchronous gaming platforms Board Game Arena, Boitaju, and Yucata.de. In all places, I am Wombat929 and be happy to play a game with you. So head over to the guild and let me know what comics you'd like to see adapted into games, or even just what comics you read. I always love good recommendations. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by
Rattlebox Games.